Good morning. I'm Vince DiMaggio. I'm the Assistant City Manager of the City of El Cajon. To my right is the Chief of Police, Mike Moulton. And as you may know, over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've held a series of town hall meetings with residents like yourselves to talk about the issue of homelessness. We've talked about what our limitations are. We've talked about what the opportunities for us to address the issue are. And we decided that it would be good to come into a more intimate setting, into a living room, to once again hear from you, address your concerns, talk to you about where we're limited, but what we can do to move forward to really address the issue.
I have a question. I manage the Home Street Bank in El Cajon, and the homeless people, it got so bad I had to hire a security company just because they'd be camped up in front of the ATM, in front of the doors, and throughout the day they're on the grass smoking crack. And I don't understand, why can't these people be arrested?
They can, and they are. What you don't see is an arrest for public drug use or drug possession nowadays is a ticket. So they're not physically put in handcuffs. They're not taken to jail because we can't. Prop 47 changed state law, the reducing drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor. And our county jail's booking criteria doesn't allow us to book people arrested for drug possession or using drugs into jail. Now, one of the examples I give at the forums it's a little bit different here because we're in a private residence, but one of the examples I give in the forums that we do is if somebody could walk into that forum, literally smoking crack or methamphetamine, walk up to any one of you and punch you in the face, and as long as you're not seriously injured, I cannot put that person in jail. That person will get a ticket. And that's just that is our current criminal justice system in the state of California. It's frustrating for my officers, it's frustrating for me, but that's where we're at. That's where we're at with the laws we've passed over the last decade.
So, a quick question too. So a homeless person punched me in the face, and I'm gonna punch that person back. Would I be arrested?
You have a right to defend yourself, using force that is proper to defend yourself. If you guys could just get in a mutual fist fight, then you're both committing battery and you both could be arrested. But if somebody, is about to punch you and you push them away from you, then you have a right to defend yourself in that manner. So every situation is going to be unique. And I still encourage, call us when you see that. It's illegal, to use drugs in public. It's just not something that we can book people into jail for. So you may call us and you may see the officers show up, but if the people don't leave, it's because they weren't arrested in the physical sense that we're used to, seeing on TV, that they're put in handcuffs, they're thrown in the back of a car, they're taken to jail. Because we can't do that anymore with those types of crimes.
So how does it play out? For instance, like with her, you said at the bank, right? You
Right.
on the bank. So like if she were to reach out to your department and say, there's someone who's maybe out of control or using drugs out in an illicit manner right in front of the business, what can your officers do, and like how would that play out, I guess?
So one, I'll talk about this, and if you talk about why I called and an officer didn't show up right away, and I know some of you just recently went through the Citizens Academy, so some of you know the questions to this. But often when I go talk to community groups, I go, okay, we're in the city of El Cajon. There's 105,000 people that live here. It's a 14 square mile city. It's very dense population-wise. How many officers do you think are out in the streets right now, protecting that 14 square miles and 105,000 people? And I've gotten answers all over the place, 20, 50, 100. There's probably 10 police officers out in the field right now.
Yeah.
So our department has 126 sworn, but that's for the entire department. So we have detectives, we have people in traffic, we have officers in patrol. So our patrol staffing levels are about 10. Then we triage calls, right? We answer about 200, we answer about 70,000 radio calls a year, so that works out to about 200 a day. And those calls are of various levels of seriousness, right? So if there's a battery, if we look outside right now and there's two people fighting, that's a priority 2 call. There's a risk of somebody being injured. If we look outside and somebody's chasing somebody with a knife, that's a priority 1 call. That's somebody's life is in danger. Public drug use, it's a priority 4 call. You know, if your car,
Priority 4?
because we're dealing with this, we're trying to triage calls. If there's a domestic violence, it's a priority 1 call.
Okay.
So the reason why you might not get a fast response time, or the reason why you might see an officer just actually drive past it, is because they may be going to a priority 1 call. They may be going to a life or death emergency. They may be going to a call that's active where somebody's, you know, physical safety is in jeopardy. So that's why you might see those things. But certainly, so how does it play out? I mean, that's a long explanation of how it plays out. When we show up, if we see them using narcotics, they're going to be arrested, you know, for possession of narcotics. The reason I want people to still continue to call us is because we're going to take that person's narcotics and destroy them, you know, because we want to get that stuff off of the street. So still, we certainly want those calls.
We love our home. I live in the Granite Hills neighborhood, and we love where we live. We've made it, our house is our home. We've put a lot of money, time, effort, invested into that. We love our home, but we don't like the travel to get there. Mm-hmm. So what can I do as a citizen other than, is there anything more that I can do other than call you guys? If I'm approached by a guy meandering through traffic, you know, what can I do as a citizen? From your perspective, what's my role? What's my key play in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many nuances, right? If you feel comfortable, you know, if I saw somebody weird around my neighborhood, I'd probably stop and engage them and say, hey, are you looking for somebody? If I didn't recognize them. But I'm comfortable doing that. If you're not, then I would say don't. If you think it's a prowler type situation, then call us. Sure. If you think it's a homeless person meandering in traffic, it's a traffic safety issue, but in all honesty, they're probably going to be gone by the time we can get an officer there, right, you know, an hour to 2 later. Right. So it's all about what your comfort level is, what the behavior you see is, and address it. Address it with what your comfort level is. Okay. I deal with the same stuff, you know. Yeah, I'm a police officer and I'm a police chief, but I'm also a resident of my community, you know, and I see the same things you see, and I get as frustrated about it as you do. Sure. And you know, I've been in the policing business now for nearly 30 years. It's my 28th year, and I've seen things change over that 30 years. And I've seen things change because of the legislation that we as a community of California have passed. Now, I do think voters have been duped, you know, in the past. Prop 47 was called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. Had nothing to do with neighborhoods and schools. It had to do with, you know, lowering the consequences essentially for things that were deemed to be low-level crimes. And then there's other legislation that exacerbated it too. And then I think where the problem really accelerated was with COVID. Because when COVID happened, the Judicial Council of the state of California set all bail to zero except for violent felonies, essentially. So nobody could be booked into jail, I mean, unless they committed a violent felony.
So what happens with the tickets that the homeless or the drug user, what goes from there? So it costs tax dollars to put it through the system. What happens now?
So they get a court date. If they show up, you know, they'll go through the criminal justice system with the judge. If they don't show up, they'll get a warrant. Now this is where it's really not effective, because if you have a misdemeanor warrant, we can't put you in jail for a misdemeanor warrant. So, you know, so I could arrest you every day for possession of methamphetamine, write you a ticket, you could get a warrant every day. You could rack up, you know, 50 or 100 arrest warrants, and there's nothing that we can do with that person because you cannot book somebody into jail for a misdemeanor warrant. Now there is talk. So now we're starting to talk about, okay, what would it look like if a misdemeanor jail was created? You know, very low security, if you know, it's so minimum staffing, stuff like that. So there are discussions about how to fix that, because eventually we're just going to end up with hundreds of thousands of warrants in this county, and then it's, what do we do with that? So there are conversations now about how to alleviate some of those things, but right now that's what happens. You know, if you show up to court, then you proceed through the criminal justice system. If you don't, you get a warrant that you can't be put into jail for.
We used to have services available, and those institutions were defunded over a period of 55, 56 years. Okay, it started with Governor Reagan, who actually was implementing something that was a policy that came from John F. Kennedy, and said, well, let's clean out the mental institutions. Let's get rid of mental institutions. That's where these people with significant mental health issues would go. And so over a period of 2 decades, the institutions were slowly and slowly starved of funding until the last one closed, I believe, in the 1990s. And so then we had services within the jail system, within the criminal justice system, right? So when somebody got arrested, the quote-unquote war on drugs, right? So when someone got arrested, they would go into the system, but it was still a minor offense. You get sentenced to 6 months or something, and you do 3, but you had the ability to take advantage of services that were in the system. Not to mention, you're not a violent person, but you were in jail with violent people, and you would say to yourself, I don't want to be with murderers and rapists and people that are mean people. I just did some drugs. So that was the really defining moment for a lot of people to take advantage of the services. Many times the judges would say, I'm sentencing you to 6 months. You have to take advantage of the internal services, okay? And then you'd serve your 3 months because you're not going to serve 6 months for personal drug use. But you had the services there, the so-called wraparound services. The alcohol, drug treatment, the counseling, it was all there. Much greater chance that your family, your loved ones would take you back and that you had this experience that you don't want to repeat. So, but that was all taken away because there is a feeling that it's a lifestyle and we shouldn't interfere with a lifestyle. And so that's why you see the scenes out of San Francisco that you see. There is bills that are proposed every single session, mostly from Northern California Assembly members and senators, that want to legalize all drugs. All drugs. MDMA, the date rape drug, let's legalize it. Heroin, let's legalize it. This is what they're proposing, okay? So lifestyle, the fact that they want to legalize drugs, and the fact that incarceration doesn't work. Those are the 3 premises that the majority party is operating under. Now, let me be clear. My job is informing the city council of these things, okay? I'm nonpartisan, right? I'm not telling you who to vote for, right? I used to be a city manager in Texas. There's a supermajority there in the other direction. So I often told my council about goofy laws that were coming from the party in the opposite direction.
Mike, you had said that you've been in law enforcement for 28 years. Kind of piggybacking on what you were talking about, prior to this was the Prop 47? Was that when you were in law enforcement, say 20 years ago, did you see success in arresting people for whatever drug use was, crack or heroin or methamphetamine or whatever it was, and they would go through a 3-month, jail time, go through the program, whatever was set in place at that time? Did you see success in that? And were you like a resident here in El Cajon years ago?
So one of the greatest success programs I've seen in treating drug addiction was called drug court. So
Drug court?
Drug court. So for minor possession, you would be eligible for drug court. Now there was a stick and a carrot, and it was, if you go through this program, we'll wipe your record clean like it never happened. But if you don't, you're going to go to jail. And they would even let people relapse. We had officers in the court, and encouraging people to get better. And people would relapse. They would still, give them a second chance. Everybody deserves a second chance. That's the most successful program I've ever seen. Because like I said, there was a carrot and there was a stick. Now there's just a carrot. There's no stick. There's no consequence. So, if there's no consequence, I don't really have to follow through. And that's what we're seeing now. So that's the most successful drug treatment program I've ever seen.
When was that?
It was all the way from the late 90s through Prop 47 essentially ended drug court. Okay. Because there's no more, Prop 47 ended the stick. We can't incarcerate you for drug use anymore. Or for drug use, drug possession.
Vince, I have a question. This is like 2 questions. Why doesn't Coronado have a big homeless problem? So I talked to a couple homeless people that were hanging around the bank, And this one guy goes, I go, why don't you go to a shelter? He had brand new Nike shoes, and I saw him every day for a week, and he had different shorts, clothes on every day. He goes, well, I'm not even from around here. I wouldn't even know where to go. So I'm like, okay, are they busing him to El Cajon or something, or what?
So those are two questions, and I'll answer them. I'll take the second one first, which is, are they busing them here? Yes. Okay. The county's program basically takes homeless individuals that are eligible to participate in the motel voucher program and are busing them to El Cajon. And the reason why is because the voucher itself is worth a certain amount of money. Okay, so the hotels closer to the coast are higher per night rates, right, than the East County motels. So they bus the folks, the homeless folks, over here with a voucher that's worth about $150 a night, and they occupy motels primarily in El Cajon, some in other locations in East County, but primarily El Cajon. Remember what we said from our town halls. We have 3% of the county population. We're housing 16% of the county's homeless. We're absorbing 15%, 16% of the problem because they're coming from other jurisdictions. We also have resources here. So to get to your first question, why doesn't Coronado have homeless? There's a couple of ways to answer that question. First, there's no county resources there. There's no social services there. The social services are either downtown San Diego, near the county and city buildings, or out in East County, because El Cajon has several social service buildings here. And so they're eligible to receive financial aid, and they do, and they're very good at capturing the aid that they're eligible for, that the state has made available for them. And so they go to where the aid is.
I have a question. Aside from drug use, how can we get the trash and the tents off of the streets?
So twice a week, we go out, or actually once a week, twice a week occasionally. Once a week we go out with the Public Works Department. Do you remember the number, how much trash we picked up, that number? It's astronomical.
It was 21 737s. So what that equates to in
tonnage.
Pounds, the tonnage, I don't know, but
That's how much trash we picked up was it the last year?
Yes.
So we are. There's homeless advocates, and there's a new one in El Cajon that I've seen on YouTube. As quick as we can clean up the street, they're taking stuff out to the homeless populations that are adding to the trash problem, giving them tents, giving them blankets, giving them pillows, giving them food that leaves wrappers. As quick as we can pick it up, more is getting put down. But we are picking up a lot of trash. So we are picking it up. You're still seeing it. We're trying to get better at it, and I think we're going to try to expand those programs to keep things clean. But yeah, that's always going to be a struggle of we're trying to clean things up, and there's advocates that think they think they're doing good, but they're giving them additional things that are adding to our trash problem.
Maybe we could implement the advocates when they give them items that create trash. Give them a trash bag to go with it. Yeah, would be a start.
Yeah.
Anyway, because it's to the point where I want to go out and start picking up trash, but that means me on a one-on-one level confronting them, and then that usually leads to trouble. And I don't want to get in trouble. I've been in trouble enough in my past. I'm living proof that incarceration programs do work, because I've been homeless when I was a teenager, and I've been in the military, and I've had extensive drug use, and I've been incarcerated. I'm a success story, and I'm a success story because I decided I want to change, and that's what we need to instill. That's the key answer is how do you get somebody to change that may or may not know they want to change or need to change? That's the $1 million question.
I've talked to a lot of folks, that had addiction problems and are productive members of society now. And the only two types of programs that I've ever heard working are ones that have consequences, that usually involve incarceration, or faith-based ones, And to each their own, but those are the only two models that I've seen successful, in my 20 plus years in law enforcement, interacting with people, that have had those issues.
Yes, the second one you said was faith-based?
Yeah, faith-based.
Faith-based,
I've run into a lot of people where they've gone through faith-based programs, and that's what's helped them.
There are two, just to mention your point about going back to something, revisit 47. There were two bills in the last session, one by a Democrat, one by a Republican, that did exactly that, that proposed to roll back some of the things that 47 did. They didn't get out of committee. Didn't even get out of committee. Again, who controls the committee? The people that believe that incarceration is bad. Okay, there are currently, this comes from the San Diego County District Attorney, who we met with yesterday. There are currently 7 bills that deal with fentanyl and that increase penalties for those who deal in fentanyl. So if the chief's officers can catch the drug dealers, there are enhancements for fentanyl dealing. Okay, there was a recent committee hearing, because every bill goes into committee, the whole thing, how a bill becomes a law kind of thing, and they all go to committee for their initial hearing before they get out of committee. So they invited parents of teenagers and young adults who had died from fentanyl overdose, and they were holding pictures of their kids. The chair of the committee was totally detached and unmoved by that. That those bills that are currently sitting in the state legislature will not go anywhere. Only because his comment was, well, we don't want to start another war on drugs. The war on drugs, and I asked the question, is he even old enough to know what the war on drugs was? I mean, I understand that there were problems with the war on drugs, but you're dealing with 100% of the fentanyl that comes from the southern border, okay? You're dealing with people who are dying. You're dealing with people who are dealing in this stuff that's killing people. And it's not a matter of what the race or ethnicity of the drug dealer is. We've got to stop the drug dealing. And if that means to incarcerate somebody to get them out of that whole supply chain, then that's what we got to do.
So we speak about what happens after they become addicted or homeless. Where's the prevention in getting them to the point where they're there, and they can't be helped? Is there any program for that?
I want to just touch on fentanyl real quick, because we talked about it. It does kind of intersect with homelessness. Fentanyl is a big problem. I think it's a lot bigger problem than anybody realizes. We had 100,000 people die in this country last year from fentanyl overdose. It's going to be higher this year. No, so the officers they're carrying Narcan. I mean, they're administering on a daily basis. We have Narcan vending machines now. The county's putting those up. They're handing out Narcan to homeless encampments. So even with all this Narcan that is reversing the effects and preventing people from dying from overdose, we're still going to end up with over 100,000 people dead. It is a serious, huge problem. And thank God we haven't seen it proliferate through our schools yet. The problem is we're finding fentanyl in everything. If you talk to the DEA, they're finding fentanyl in every drug that's coming across the border, every single drug. We're finding fentanyl in pills that are counterfeit pills for stuff that's not supposed to be fentanyl. So there's a lot of accidental overdose with fentanyl. People take fentanyl intentionally, but my biggest fear is these pills that that people might think are Ativan or something like that are really fentanyl, and that's how a lot of what Vince was talking about earlier, these California parents that lost kids. Those kids didn't think they were taking fentanyl. So that problem needs to be addressed, or it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
And now with the dosages being upped to keep your clientele hooked, there's no way to prevent that higher dose from getting into the schools to a kid who's never taken it before, to a person who's experimenting, unfortunately, and never taken it. That's instant. That's instant death, right? I mean, what the cartels have done is figure out, hey, let's get a pill press, and we'll make it look like a prescription drug, and we'll put it in pill form, and there you go. You're off to the races.
What about, I don't know if you've heard any more, Bill Walton was suggesting something about have a homeless area in San Diego where just the homeless go there, and if they stray outside of that, they can be arrested and taken back to the place. Is there any more talk on that, or?
Well, I mean, my first response to that would be, do you want it in your neighborhood? Right? I don't want it in mine. So I mean, that's the argument that always comes up with homeless shelters and everything else. It's where do we put something like that? But in addition to that, there is, the criminality portion of homelessness. It's not going to stay in the confines. Drug addicts, we know, steal stuff, to keep their drug habit going. So if we had an area specifically for that, and we still have drug addiction problems, we're still going to have theft problems around that area. In fact, if you localized it to a certain area, let's say we did put it in a square acre out here somewhere, right? I guarantee you that theft around that square acre is going to increase exponentially. And going back to when you asked about Coronado, why does Coronado not have homeless people? Well, a couple of reasons. Geographically, one, it's essentially an island. You can't walk over the Coronado Bay Bridge, so you have to walk the 7 miles from Imperial Beach on the Strand, and there's no public transportation. There's no trolley. One of the interesting dynamics about an affluent area, that big trolley expansion that just went through UTC, I used to live in that area at one point, and I still visit it because of the mall out there. I'd never seen a homeless person out there until that trolley opened. I see homeless people at UTC now. So it's those types of issues that I like. Even if I think if we had a great plan, a great location, and stuff like that, I think it's really going to negatively impact the areas surrounding that location. And I think that's why probably, rightfully so, people don't want it in their backyard, because it will create issues. Because again, we're not dealing with, I think the misconception is that, a majority of our homeless population are the elderly or women with children. I can tell you from the criminality standpoint of what the police are dealing with, nothing could be farther from the truth. A vast majority of the people that we are dealing with have substance abuse problems, mental health problems, and extensive criminal histories. So, in 1995, when I started, I dealt with homeless population. We've always had a homeless population. I can tell you the homeless population has changed drastically in that time. The homeless population that I dealt with, I would say the demographic was 40 to 55-year-old white males that were drunks. They abused alcohol. And, they didn't want any problems with the police. They would hide from us. They would sleep in bushes. Every once in a while, there would be a problem. They'd get drunk. They'd cause a disturbance. We'd end up arresting them for drunk in public. But other than that, I would say that they were fairly harmless. They didn't want public contact. They wanted to drink and hide in the bushes. What we've seen, and what I attribute it to is, the changing in legislation and the inability to put people in jail, is I would say our primary demographic for homeless people that we're dealing with from a criminal standpoint are 20, to 35 years old that have drug addiction problems and or mental health problems and have extensive criminal histories. So that's our population today that we're dealing with, which is vastly different than the population we were dealing with 25 years ago.
So on the ride along with the officer that I had rode with, they have a rapport with the homeless and some of these people. So you guys are doing a great job in that manner. They're not arresting them, they're sending them on their way, but that hasn't fixed the problem. So when someone becomes to the point where they need to be arrested, what's the success rate in dealing with that type of a situation? What happens when they're incarcerated?
Well, unfortunately, to get incarcerated to where you're not going to be, victimizing society anymore, you have to commit a violent felony now. So unfortunately, it's kind of too late. Somebody's been the victim of violent felony if you're going to be in jail for any length of time. So I don't think that is a solution. I don't want to wait till people become the victims of a violent felony. So it's such a complex problem. I don't think there's any one, simple answer.
So do you see that ball being thrown, that fastball being thrown, that this guy will eventually wind up in jail?
What do you mean?
In other words, you guys are out there, you know these people well. So can you see that coming from any of the individuals where they're gonna wind up in a year or 6 months?
It's impossible because I think some people, are healed, and we've seen it. Some people we've gotten reconnected with family on halfway across the country. The Salvation Army has a great program for that. Sometimes, so the vast majority of people that we're contacting today, they don't want help because we'll offer them help and they don't want it. But that doesn't mean, in 5 months after we contacted them for the 45th time, they finally say, yeah, you know what, I want some help. So there's always that hope, and I think we always have to keep that hope because we're not just going to give up. So it's like I said, it's a combination of a lot of things. I think there should be consequences for violating the law. I think there should be consequences for violating the law and refusing to accept help, to become a productive member of society. I think people deserve second chances. I think we should try to help everybody that we can help, and we're doing all those things. We're not being real successful with it right now because what has happened with the homeless problem in the last 5 years? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Because I think we've changed policies and laws, and we've changed criminally, we've changed policies on who we're going to incarcerate, but we didn't have any plan on what to do with what we're going to do with those folks. When we let a lot of people out of prison with AB 109, which was in 2012, it was to, our state prisons in California were overcrowded. So we let out, I think it was 60,000 people over a couple year period, which is great. I don't think incarceration is always the answer, but the problem was there was no plan on what to do with those folks. There was no plan to rehabilitate them, to teach them job skills, any of that stuff. So what did we think was going to happen? They were going to reoffend. We set them up for failure. We let them out of prison and didn't give them any services on the back end to keep them from reoffending. So I'm not saying any of these policies are bad, but I'm saying they need to be thought through better when we're doing them, so we have an idea what we're going to do, on the backside of things.
Anybody that is in El Cajon that wants help, we have programs that will help them. If they come to a police officer, if they have an encounter with a police officer and they say, I'm at that point, I want help, that police officer knows what to do to get them help. We have programs, whether it's ECTLC, whether it's Home Start. Those are our the people that work with us. And just like I said, if there is that rare occasion where it's somebody who became homeless because their rent just went up astronomically, we can put them in housing very, very rapidly. So the people that you're seeing on the streets are people that primarily Home Start said last night at our town hall meeting, Home Start said they know 90% of the homeless individuals. They have contacted them over and over and over again. They might not know 10% because they may be new to the area or coming from outside the area. They know 90% and they've offered them help. They don't want help. So it's that thing there. If we don't have a trigger to I don't know if I want to say force, but if we don't have something compulsory to at least get them to feel what it's like not to be on drugs, then how do we get them to the next step?
So what happens when you group all these types of persons together? Is there a problem that can happen? Right?
We've seen significant problems in the hotels that are primarily voucher-driven hotels. We have some hotels in the city are nearly 100% capacity of homeless voucher programs. One of the things we noticed is they're getting preyed upon by drug dealers because it's a central location where you have people with addiction problems. So they're being victimized. These programs aren't requiring any type of security, which they should. There's little oversight. So again, these programs could be successful, but they're being run poorly, it's causing further victimization of the homeless population, which these people are claiming, that they're trying to help. No, they're getting violated more. Yeah, they have a roof over their head, but so we're seeing significant crime problems in and around the hotels that are primary voucher-related hotels. We've made a number of arrests at all of the hotels but we are seeing an increase in criminal activity around those hotels.
What process happens when you actually issue that ticket? Then what happens? Or like if someone's in front of the bank doing drugs or whatever it is, and your officers are called, and then they show up on site. Like what inevitably happens then?
So there's a couple issues. One, if we write a misdemeanor arrest, we talked about this, and it turns into a warrant. There's nothing we can do with that warrant, because we can't book them into the jail. But the other issue that has occurred is, everybody has bandwidth and capacity. The jails have bandwidth and capacity. How many people can they house? The DA's office has bandwidth and capacity. How many people can they prosecute? And COVID, when it shut the courts down, we knew that there was going to be a tremendous problem with prosecuting cases. Because I remember even back when we had fires and the courthouses were just closed for a few days, it created like months of backlog. So the fact that the courts were closed for months, we knew that the backlog was going to be crazy. So what we did, we looked back and we looked at a time frame, I believe it was from November of 22 to March of 20. And we looked at just illegal lodging arrests, 640-70 of the penal code. And it was 300, so we made 300 and something arrests for illegal lodging. And we couldn't find a single one that had been prosecuted, a single case that had been issued. So our officers were writing these, and that's how that's how this came about. We have officers that kind of deal with the homeless population specifically, so they make a lot of these arrests, and they kept saying, none of our cases are getting issued. Nothing's happening with these tickets we're writing. And from the officer's standpoint, I'm sure you can imagine they're thinking, why am I doing this? It's a waste of my time. I could be doing something more productive. So that's why we started looking into the issue, and that's when we found that, hey, we're making a lot of arrests for this, and nothing's happening with those arrests. So that was an issue we ran into.
So out of multiple hundred arrests, not a single prosecuted.
Not a single. We couldn't find one where a single case had been issued.
Is there some similar? And you said that was illegal lodging, so that would be encampments, sleeping out in front of businesses and things like that. How about when it comes to like the illicit drug paraphernalia or possession? When it comes to just like single use, or not like a dealer, but like a single use, do you have how many arrests you guys had for that, or tickets that you guys wrote, and how many were prosecuted on that end?
So we actually just started a study. I asked our analysts to start looking into this just a couple weeks ago. I want to look at all our arrests for 2022 for theft, auto theft, drug possession, drug paraphernalia possession. So we're actually just going into that. It's very laborious because we have to look at each arrest, and then we have to look inside that case and see if the DA's office prosecuted it or if they sent us a rejection for it. So it's very labor intensive, so it's probably going to take a while, but we just started looking into that for those other crimes. Because I would imagine it's going to be the same for those low-level misdemeanor crimes. I would imagine that a lot of them were not prosecuted.
And the DA is limited by the same thing the police department is limited by, right? So it's all whether they feel they can prosecute it. Now, having met with the DA yesterday, city managers conference was held just coincidentally yesterday where the DA was a speaker there. She rolled out a program that I'm very optimistic about. I hope she can do it, because what she's trying to do on the county level is to try and do the CARES court, but with the carrot and stick approach. So because she has laws at her disposal, so she needs to craft a program that can actually offer housing, which is what she's trying to do out of her office, throughout the county, not just in one area. And also, if you don't take it, use the crimes that are already on the books to prosecute that person. So, I mean, I came away from the meeting very optimistic that if she can actually muster the resources that she needs to make that program a reality, it could be a little bit of a game changer.
So you said that when you show up to a call about like some drug use or things like that, you guys were to take the drugs, but a lot of these arrests or tickets or citations aren't being prosecuted. What else can you guys do, or can we do to make it more difficult, maybe for them to acquire the drugs or use the said drugs in public places or things like that?
It's one of the biggest reasons we still encourage people to call us, because a lot of people get discouraged, right? Nothing's going to happen. I'm not going to call you anymore. I say, no, call us. One, it helps us understand where to focus our resources, if we get a lot of complaints in certain areas. But two, especially for the drug use, I want my officers responding to that, even if we don't think anything's going to happen to the person criminally, so we can seize the drugs, and later destroy them. Because that is an inconvenience for the drug user, And if it becomes not an inconvenience for them, you will only see the problem of public drug use get worse. Look at the public drug use problem in San Francisco. There's almost no enforcement for it, and public drug use is rampant everywhere in the downtown area. If we don't do anything about it, that will happen here.
When you said you guys, your officers, if we call your guys' department because we see someone using drugs outside of a building or out in public, you guys seize those drugs. Do you know how much you guys have seized over the in a monthly basis, yearly basis? It's a serious question.
Yeah. No, we keep track of that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I can tell you yesterday that we got a pound of methamphetamine.
A pound yesterday? Wow.
So that actually can segue nicely into another problem. The drug problem in this country's, I worked narcotics in the early 2000s, and a pound of methamphetamine was $5,000 to $8,000.
Okay.
A pound of methamphetamine today is $500. And that's just because of the pure volume of narcotics that is coming across the southern border. That's the only reason. So it's so easy to get, drugs now. They're so cheap now. So that's an issue.
And I mean, just taking into inflation, that doesn't make sense. I mean, we're going real backwards there. So that's a wild statistic to know.
Well, it's supply and demand,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's a lot of demand, and so consequently, there's a lot of supply.
It's scary, actually, to know that there's that.
Yeah, it's the cheapest it's ever been recorded. So I was talking to the director of an organization called HIDTA, which is High Intensity Drug Trafficking Corridor. So they have an office here in San Diego because we have a drug trafficking corridor in San Diego, obviously through the southern border. And he'd been, in the narcotics business, enforcement business for over 30 years, and it's the cheapest he's ever seen it across the board. So, and that was just recently. But yeah, I think it's really important that people keep calling in about issues that they're having in their neighborhoods. The biggest thing for me is it allows me to look at, okay, where do we need to redeploy our resources? We have technologies that we can deploy. We have camera trailers and those types of things that we can deploy in areas that reduce the criminality surrounding homelessness. So it's really important that people call. The app, I think, is really good, and we got to keep we got to keep the streets clean. So when you see trash, report on the app. I know our public works department works tirelessly, trying to clean up the streets. We have people, on a weekly basis, going out with the public works department, to get rid of encampments. Encampments are not allowed in the city of El Cajon. One of the questions that has come up is private property. Private property owners, there are some businesses in the city of El Cajon that do not want to give us what's called an illegal lodging letter to allow us to remove encampments from their property when they call. So if you're a private property owner and you want to let a couple of homeless people live on your property with tents, you can do that. So we have had people call and say, hey, there's an encampment here. Well, a vast majority, and let me get this straight, a vast majority of the businesses in El Cajon do not want encampments on their property, and we have illegal lodging letters with them. But there are, like I said, there are some that refuse to do one. So that could be a situation too where, and if that was the case, how do you deal with that as a citizen? Go to that business and say, I don't want this in my neighborhood. Can you call the police can you remove this, Because, and we see this with graffiti, and everybody knows kind of what the theory of the broken window theory, if you allow a window to stay broken in a neighborhood, you'll have more blight in that neighborhood. But we see it with graffiti, and that's why we try to clean up graffiti immediately. Because if we leave graffiti in an area, there'll be more graffiti, then more. If we take it down right away, they go, well, that's, it's kind of a waste for me to spend my time writing on the wall if it's going to get taken down in an hour. So that's why it's important, to call us right away, to report it on the app right away, these encampments that you see, the trash that you see. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be there 2 hours later, a day later. It could have been cleaned out and reestablished, and you wouldn't even know that. When we clean encampments up, we can't throw people's belongings away. We cannot throw their property away. We throw trash away. So if there's somebody that they have a tent and they're leaving, they're going to take their tent with them. And they're going to put it somewhere else. We can't take that tent. It's their property.
Well, I want to thank all of you for inviting the chief and I to have this more intimate setting and to talk about the issues and talk about what we can all do together, continue to work on moving this forward. And we have some great partners that we're working with, and we'll continue to work with them. And the more you can spread the word to your coworkers, your friends, your your neighbors, to let them know that there are things that we can do. We can work together. We can partner up in various ways and have humanitarian solutions to this. So I want to thank you for inviting us into this, and I think we're going to move forward.